Imagine having a portable sink in your house. You can wash your hands anywhere you want. Amazing, isn't it? But it's not some new, innovative, high-tech product. It was a wash basin, a home accessory that didn't withstand the test of time. Regardless, these old home features aren't just architectural details. In fact, they show glimpses of norms and values from a time when lives moved way slower than they do now. Today, we'll look at some of the most amazing old home features that have faded into history. Notice how these features will feel foreign, yet still so familiar. You don't want to miss the last one. Let's begin. At number 1, we have the parlor room. Hop into a time machine, travel back to the 18th or 19th century, and you'll find a parlor room in every decent house. Having one back in the day was a symbol of high social status. Are you even a noble family if you don't entertain your guests surrounded by the fanciest of tastes you could possibly afford? The parlor room is where you would meet guests who came to visit you. Inside this room, you'd have your best furniture and art. It was nicely decorated, would be called the best room in the house, and you'd use it for events like weddings, births, funerals, and so on. These parlor rooms emerged in the 18th century as an evolution to the great halls. By the time we entered the Victorian era, parlor rooms became a crown jewel even in middle and upper class homes. This is one of those rooms that was often kept closed so it could stay clean and have a welcoming ambiance. Parlor rooms had many different items like comfortable chairs or sofas and maybe an old-fashioned piano for music. But with advancements in technology and a growing preference for modern living, homes soon started to have things like TVs, stereos, and gaming consoles for entertainment. With this, the parlor room slowly started to fade away, and our living room is all that's left of it today. At number 2, we have the dumbwaiter. Don't get us wrong, we're making fun of anyone here. A dumbwaiter was a small elevator inside your house. This innovation has been around for centuries and was primarily used in ancient Greece for moving food from the kitchen to the dining room. This neat little gadget was invented in 1833 by a New York inventor named George W. Cannon and quickly became popular among commercial and residential establishments. Back in the day, dumbwaiters were a key selling point in multi-story homes and are still used today. Electric motors were added to the dumbwaiter in the 1920s, but before that, you'd have to manually operate one using ropes and pulleys. While these devices were much smaller than a traditional elevator, they could still carry loads weighing up to a couple hundred pounds. You could use a dumbwaiter for moving laundry, food, and other items quite easily, which made them something almost every homeowner wanted. These small elevators would start in the basement and go all the way to the attic and would have stops in the kitchen and the upstairs hallway. If you buy a house and find a trapdoor in the living room or kitchen opening to an oddly shaped closet, it's probably a dumbwaiter that was closed off. Impressed? Good news! You can still get a dumbwaiter installed in your house if you want, but just remember that it can be quite complex, so you'll need to have an expert working on it. Dutch doors. Next up, we have Dutch doors that were originally curated by farmers of the era. These go as old as the 17th century, originating all the way from the Netherlands. Dutch doors, also called double-hung doors, are basically split doors divided horizontally in a way that they can be opened independently. This means the bottom one could remain shut, even if the top part was opened, thus limiting entry, exit, while still creating an opening. Of course, people didn't want their family goats wandering in the kitchen as they opened the door for some fresh air. Plus, it was a great way to keep the curious toddlers indoors. When the Dutch brought this unique feature to North America, the people of New York and New Jersey were quick to adapt. Soon, this became a nostalgic staple of the colonial lifestyle. You would also find such half doors in ancient Irish cottages. Although it's been a while since they went out of style, if the aesthetic of your home is more towards the vintage style, you can still bring them back, especially if you're living in the countryside. After all, it's an adorable little way of letting fresh air flow in, except that the design is all about come in but not all at once. Icebox. At number 4, we have the icebox. You see, it's pretty much impossible to imagine life without the refrigerator you use every day at your home. Well, the question is, how were people keeping their food fresh before the invention of one? Our ancestors' homes were installed with a wooden cabinet that could hold a massive piece of ice. They had an iceman that would literally make ice deliveries for this purpose. The block of ice was perched on the top, and as the cold air radiated down, the food was kept fresh. For homes that could afford one, it was pretty much considered as a flex in front of the dinner guests. They remained in the picture throughout the 19th century and the early 20th century. Until 1920, when the electric refrigerators started to replace them slowly. This icebox is definitely a great relic from the past that speaks about the ingenuity of finding a way to prepare their meals and keep the milk from going bad. Moving on to number 5. Transom windows. To say that a well-built 19th century home was incomplete without transom windows wouldn't exactly be wrong. These elegant little panes sat above the doors of the house that were separated with horizontal beams to add slices of sunshine to the living space. They could even be opened in a way where warm air expelled out and the cooler breeze could sweep in. It was one of the most tactical ways of keeping indoors cool with this cross-ventilation mechanism. These originated from ancient Rome and were usually featured in their temples and public architectural wonders. The 18th and the 19th century marked their popularity in the Europe and North American regions as well. This was the era where symmetry and proportions were the ideal aspects of architecture, and this lovely feature checked all those boxes. They could also be made artistic with stained or etched, thus being a unique piece of canvas, making every home distinct. As the years passed by, this charming feature started to take a back seat. While most people preferred solid doors and more privacy, there's a chance you can still see this in historic buildings and homes. Or better, what's stopping you from getting it installed in your home to add that old-world elegance? Coming on to number 6. Coal chute. The home that is built with a coal chute was probably built in ancient times, long before people knew global warming was very much real. While it had no regard for eco-friendliness itself, this feature used to be a must-have in homes that relied on coal for heating. Coal chutes allowed coal to be delivered directly to the home. Mostly, you would find it in the basement and cellar of old Victorian homes, rightfully so, considering the walls of such rooms are found to be black to date. Made of metal, this was basically an angled tunnel where a week's supply of coal would be delivered. This used to be next to the furnace to make things easier. In homes that didn't have a coal chute, workers called the lumpers would supply the coal in wheelbarrows to a designated coal room in the house. Wealthier people also had a device along with this coal chute that would directly transport the coal to the furnace without having the need to manually shovel the coal. In all honesty, having a coal chute in the home was more towards the convenience side, especially in regions where harsh winters made it impossible to not burn coal for heating homes. Good thing we now have electrical ways to heat our homes. Coal chutes have basically become obsolete. We're sure nobody wants black walls and coal dust anywhere near their house. Servant's staircase. At number 7, let's talk about the servant staircase. Back in the day, people were very uptight about social status and hierarchy. Especially when it came to grand estates and early urban mansions, there was a clear distinction within the occupants of the house. The servant staircase was more than just a solid structure of the house. It was rather an exemplary feature of the visible social structure of the time as well. In rich homes, there used to be a narrow, often tucked-away staircase. It was a rather discreet way for the servant staff to navigate in and about the house without actively coming in sight of the family or their guests. It was built strategically in places that connected the parts of the house in a way that the staff always had quick access. They were typically plain staircases, designed more for function rather than form. While modern homes no longer feature servant staircases, you might still find one in an old Victorian mansion. Know that in this case, you've most likely discovered a piece of history. Don't get too surprised if you find them tucked well enough, like an almost secret passage. Let's move on to number 8. Butler's pantry. Originating back to the Edwardian era, during the 1880s and early 1900s, a butler's pantry was an organized space designed to cater to butlers' operations. A butler is a chief servant who primarily oversaw the service of meals. Typically, these pantries were used as a transition unit between the kitchen and the dining room. While the meals were obviously cooked in the kitchen, the butler's pantry was designed for the easy transfer of food and dishes during mealtimes. The layout consisted of compartments in the form of high drawers and cabinets to provide ample storage for fine china, crystal glassware, silverware, and serving platters. This made things readily available for the butler to plate and serve meals, especially during formal dinners. That's not all. This area also served as the kitchen annex, which gave lots of room for meal preps. It was one efficient way to minimize disruptions in the main kitchen. Having a well-established pantry created smooth functionality in the household. Plus, it used to be a perfect hideout for the kitchen chaos and clutter that the guests would rather not see. If your ancestors didn't have such a sneaky yet highly put-together space that's half kitchen and half closet, were they even rich? That said, a butler's pantry itself had faded from the domestic view, as the butlers don't exactly exist these days, but we still see the evolution of pantries even in modern homes, except that they function without the butler. At number 9, we have washstands. In the olden days, when the concept of the indoor common wasn't exactly a thing, these washstands were a common feature of almost every home. While they have evolved over centuries, if we go as far as the 18th century, during this time it featured a tabletop with enough room to fit in a basin and a pitcher of water. In later years, it even evolved further to have drawers and shelves to store toiletries. They were often placed in hallways and bedrooms for easy access. In fact, these washstands were also a representation of their social status. Turns out, the richer and better the taste, the fancier these washstands would be. Once homes started featuring indoor plumbing, these washstands eventually fell out of favor. What was once regarded as this designated self-care station of that time is now practically obsolete. While you might still find a washstand in a vintage store, it's most unlikely to find one in a modern home. Laundry chutes. Number 10. Laundry chutes. Laundry chutes are a classic bit of home engineering that worked like a magic portal to the land of detergents and fabric softeners. Turns out our ancestors were too cool to take their dirty socks to the laundry room. Instead of hauling armloads of clothes down the stairs, people used to have discreet laundry chutes installed in their homes. Basically, these were tunnel-like openings with a door on the wall where you could throw your clothes and they'd directly drop down to the laundry room. While the exact origin of laundry chutes is a bit unknown, they probably evolved from the other kinds of chutes used for industrial purposes. Why not domesticize one too? Especially in homes that were multi-leveled and considered to be sophisticated at that time, definitely had a laundry chute installed in the original architecture of the house. Unfortunately, this feature is now vanishing from the new construction plans of modern homes as laundry rooms move to the main floors and even upstairs. Sacrificed to the overstuffed baskets and lots of trips back and forth from closets to the laundry room, these chutes are now a rarity. As for those rare homes that still have this feature, it remains a clever and elegant solution to those overstuffed laundry baskets. Carriage houses. Next up at 11, we have carriage houses. Imagine a property feature so cool that even the horses get their own garage. Well, except that it's an entire house, one of the most sought-after add-ons of the historic homes. Back in the 18th and 19th centuries, when horse carriages were becoming a common sight, a small outbuilding came into existence behind the main houses where the well-to-do families would park their carriages and rest their horses. These also had quarters for the groomsmen or stable hands who looked after these horses, and even guest rooms for traveling guests. But why were they built behind the main house? Well, our ancestors wanted to flaunt their mansions, front porches, and exceptional gardens. Unlike our bland garages that sit right next to our homes in a boring rectangular frame, these carriage houses were designed in the original vintage character. These carriage houses featured great ranges of design, from barn doors and original exposed wood to brick walls and lofted sleeping quarters with some mid-century furnishings. While of course there's no need for us to have a carriage house now, at least as far as the horses are concerned. But what about us? That's right. While you won't actively see a carriage house every few miles, at rare places where they still exist, they are now used as separate suites. Only now that they have swapped their purpose with being a vintage place to crash. Whether they are in the form of a charming Airbnb or an artist's dream studio, these carriage houses still somewhat exist. But as we said goodbye to horse carriages, the purpose they were originally built for has now faded into history after all these generations of change. Mudrooms. At number 12, we have mudrooms. Yeah, it's definitely a low-effort name, but apparently then it used to be one of the most important features of the households. Do you know how spaceships have airlocks that sterilize all objects that come from the outside to prevent germs from entering? Consider mudrooms as an ancient equivalent to such airlocks, except that they were used to keep dirt off the main living spaces of the house. These acted as buffer rooms before the people transitioned from the outdoors to the indoors. It was our ancestral way of letting the mud, dirt, snow, and who knows what else out of the house where they belong, instead of letting it all enter the beautifully curated indoors of the home. Or to put it simply, these mudrooms came with an invisible sign that said, "Clean the dirt off of you before entering," where the mud part of the mudroom really earned its keep. Originally, they were an absolute necessity in farmhouses and country homes. These also came with additional features such as benches, shoe racks, hooks for hanging coats, and even a small washing station in case one had to wash up their feet right then and there. However, as we approach the modern urban lifestyle, we no longer see mudrooms in home designs. Instead, we have shifted to more fluid and open entryways with more emphasis on open living and leaving behind the traditional mudrooms. Built-in phone stations. Number 13. Built-in phone stations. As crazy as it sounds for our ancestors, having a telephone in their home had the same level of awe as having a private home theater might have today. By the time it was early 20th century, as telephones became more common, especially in the upper class, so did the built-in phone stations that were nestled into the walls. Most commonly found in the hallway or kitchen, these phone nooks were often styled with a wooden shelf or drawer that held the phone book. Back then, having a telephone wasn't just for communication. Rather, it was considered as a bona fide status symbol. This spot was where all the drama unfolded. These people could only go as the coiled phone cord could allow for privacy. And if someone did eavesdrop, well, could you blame them? Having a designated telephone station made things organized. Once having a landline became fashionably common, more and more homes adapted to having phone nooks. This was the time when people would wait for the calls of their loved ones, which was a huge leap for awaiting letters that could even get lost in the mail. Of course, as the world has digitized, just built-in phone stations no longer exist. You might find one in a vintage home, but that's really about it. Even though it was a clunky way of staying in touch, these phone stations were everything to the people of those times. Servants' quarters. Last but not least, we have the servant quarters. While the concept of live-in domestic house help doesn't exist anymore, back in the day, it was pretty common. Tucked away in the corners of grand homes, these often provided a comfortable roof over the heads of the hardworking staff that made sure the household was running smoothly. Of course, these spaces were often simple, functional, and catering to the staff's basic needs. Simple bedding, closet space, shared bathroom, and probably a window overlooking the lush green lawns of the rich was pretty much it. However, in some cases, it was common for people with extraordinary wealth to have servants' wings of massive sizes with an intent to be highly visible alongside the mansion. This was a way to showcase a family's power and monetary status. The funny thing is the hierarchy within the servants' quarters. While the family had its own order of status going on, there was another such social order amongst the servants as well. Up until the 20th century, all the servants living in the servants' quarters lived their lives according to this strict hierarchy. While these servant wings were the major backdrop of many stories and gossip that went around the house in everyday life, you will least likely encounter one now. The late 20th century was marked by the decline of such servant quarters. The way of living took a sharp turn, and now we rarely see the need for live-in domestic staff, unless maybe you're one of the royals. As we bid farewell to these quirky and sometimes even mysterious features that were once an integral part of the homes of our ancestors, it's almost bittersweet to see how each one of these features has its own story to tell. Even though they have faded into history, these are nostalgic reminders of where we all came from and how daily life would be back in the day. And who knows, a century from now, our descendants will look back on our smart technology and fast lifestyle and feel the same nostalgia as we feel now. Things like automatic temperature control and smart lighting will feel ancient at that point. And that, right there, is the beauty of life. Having said that, we'd love to know, which of these nostalgic home features hit you right in the feels? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section, and before you leave, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Retro America so you don't miss the next ones.